Okay, and we just have a few more people joining us as well. Hello to people who've just joined us. I have started recording the meeting just to let you know. If you can't see that on the top of the screen, welcome and thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for coming to help us launch Helen Penn's new book, Who Needs Nurseries? We Do, which was published last month digitally by Policy Press. And we'll share a link for how you can buy the book shortly in the chat. And I hope if you haven't already done so that you do. It's definitely worth it. Just before we get going, just some housekeeping for how we'll run this meeting and event. As I said, the meeting's being recorded. Please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. And please feel free to post comments in the chat throughout. After we've heard from our speakers, we'll open for a wider discussion. It would be really helpful if you could use the raise hand icon or put your hand up when you want to speak. It's a big group, so the raise hand icon would be really helpful because I think then you'll come to the top and I'll know for sure that you want to speak. And you can also type a comment into the chat if that's easier. I'll be chairing the discussion and I'll call on people in the order that I see them put their hand up. In a moment, we'll hear from Helen Penn about her new book. And then Jenny Williams is also here to speak to us about the Maxillo and Colville Nursery Centres. And if you haven't already, oh, sorry, done that bit. I'm Rosa Schling. I work for On the Record, which is a community history organisation. And for the last year and a half, I've been running a project called Grow Your Own, which is documenting the history of childcare activism across London. We're starting a new archive, which will be based at Bishopsgate Institute. And sorry, I'm going to share a just one slide about our project with you. These are our contact details. I'll put how to get in touch with us in the chat in a moment. This is just one slide about Grow Your Own. So Grow Your Own is run by On the Record with Post-Pandemic Childcare Coalition, and the project is sharing past experiences of organising for better childcare with people working to improve the situation in childcare in early years today. We've also made a podcast series called Childcare Voices, which I'll share a link to. And coming very soon, we will be launching an online map highlighting childcare campaigns and projects across London, resources for people campaigning around childcare now by Post-Pandemic Childcare Coalition, and we'll be holding play sessions with people and their under fives to engage more people and encourage them to use what we're making. And we would love it if you would like to be involved and contribute in whatever way you'd like. So I think our project is not only documenting the history, but it's about getting people who are affected by the issue now involved, and also learn from the experience and knowledge of people who were involved in childcare activism in the past, like Helen Penn and Jenny Williams. And tonight we'll also be hearing from representatives from ongoing campaigns in Leeds and Hackney that are campaigning to keep high quality public funded nurseries that are under threat of closure due to cuts open. And we'd love to hear from anyone else involved in any kind of campaigning or community work around childcare in the discussion too. Okay, so let's move. Here are the links I promised to put in my chat coming now. There you go. And so I'm going to hand over to Helen Penn now. Helen Penn was a founder member of the National Childcare Campaign in the 1970s and 1980s, and has subsequently been a director of local authority services for young children. For the last 30 years, she's been an academic at the Institute of Education, University College London, and at the University of East London. Her research has been international as well as national for organisations such as the EU, OECD, and UNICEF. Okay, over to you, Helen.
Um, uh, yes, I am unmuted. Could you just share those two slides again? Because they are central to the talk. This is our campaign slide from 50 years ago, and I think it's just as relevant now. And if you notice, it's the children who are asking for the nurseries as much as the adults. The second slide, can you put the second slide up, Rosa? Yes. This is quite an important recent report, which looks at childcare in rich countries in the developed world. And I referred to it several times in the talk, and you can guess where we stand. I think I don't need to spell it out, but I will refer to it later on. Okay. Thank you. If you go back to full screen now, Rosa. Thanks. I'm very glad that this event is being hosted by the Archival Project on the Record, which has been documenting 50 years of women's struggle for childcare. And I'm also very glad that a lot of my old friends are here tonight, recollecting some of these struggles. It's very hard to remember now, I think, how little childcare was available and how much working women were frowned upon. 50 years ago, if you wanted childcare, you either had a nanny or if your child was 3 and you lived in an urban area, you might get a part-time state nursery education place. We knew that nursery education was good, that nursery teachers were very well trained, and nursery schools were usually spacious and generously provisioned. But at the time, they were also dominated by the belief that mothers should be at home and provision should only be part-time, and it was no job of nursery schools to offer childcare. So if you were very disturbed and distraught, you might be referred to a social services day nursery place, but there were hardly any of those places, and they weren't very good. There were some childminders, but there were no private nurseries, or a handful, and it was a bit of a disgrace for women to work. So in the absence of any childcare provision, feminists tried to articulate and create their own provision. And Jen is going to give you a very specific example of how this was done in the second half of the meeting. Well, what did we campaigners think that childcare should look like? First of all, it should cover working hours and be affordable, local, cooperative and neighbourhood service and investment by the local community into a service for the community. And secondly, we thought young children were too isolated at home with only their mothers, and they needed the opportunity to make friends and play with other children. They needed safe outside space, particularly in urban areas. And as I said, the title of my book, Who Needs Nurseries We Do, referred to children as much as adults. Thirdly, we thought the people who worked in nurseries should enjoy their work, be innovative about it, be paid properly, and have the opportunity to express and develop their expertise alongside parents with whom they shared the responsibility for the children's upbringing. And fourthly, we thought nurseries should be accountable and democratic, that the parents and staff and children should be able to express their views about what was happening and to shape the service they used. These ideas did have some traction. Many community nurseries and children's centres were set up in the 1990s, mostly funded by direct grants from local authorities. The GLC funded more than 100 of them. Well, thank you, Ken. And as a young parent, I used my local community nursery, a 25-place nursery set up in the local community centre, where I faithfully attended the monthly parent-staff meetings. If this sounds fanciful or utopian, it isn't. It's how many countries organise their childcare services then and now. The UNICEF research report, which I showed you, carried out research on childcare provision in developed countries, exploring these issues of affordability, access, quality of services, staffing and accountability, all those issues we were campaigning for. Many countries now routinely provide these utopian state-funded services. Denmark came top of this particular UNICEF survey. Satisfaction with Danish services was over 80%, and the UK, by contrast, came right near the bottom alongside those other countries like Australia and Ireland, where governments have abandoned any commitment to state services or state funding, and developments have been left to the private sector. Well, what went wrong in the UK? We did have a sound basis for expansion, namely nursery education, and we could have done what France, for example, did, provide a comprehensive state-funded system of nursery schools and classes available from the age of 2.5, a system which has 98% take-up. UK government belief in and support for the market and the private sector trumped all other options. It wasn't just childcare, of course, that has fallen victim to the rigid economic dogma of supply and demand. All kinds of essential services and public utilities have been privatised. And as everyone knows, especially those of you who live on the bank of the Thames, there have been some spectacular failures, and there's real unease about marketisation. But in line with prevailing economic dogma, when it became obvious by the 1990s that expansion of childcare was inevitable, it was widely believed that the market was much more flexible in meeting growing demand. Expanding any state system would be too cumbersome for national or local government to organise. And Ofsted could provide notional regulation to ensure standards didn't fall too low. Supply and demand, private entrepreneurs responding to local pressures, all that would be much more efficient than anything the government could do to assess local need or provide new services. Private entrepreneurs would provide their own premises, so no new capital was needed. Some government money was necessary to sponsor the market, but it could best be offered not through local government grants, but through helping to fund individual parents who needed childcare through vouchers, tax relief, individual subsidies. Private nurseries could also charge fees and recoup their expenditure. The Tory government considered this was the viable way forward, but so too did Labour. Despite the Sure Start initiative, which was never intended to offer childcare, and apart from children's centres, which did try to build on nursery education provision to offer childcare, the Labour government in 2006, as part of its business strategy, not its children's strategy, passed legislation which said that no local authority should provide childcare except as a last resort. I've been charting the progress of the private sector since its beginning in the 1980s, partly through ICMEC, the organisation Eva Lloyd and I set up at the University of East London. To begin with, the private sector consisted mostly of very small operators, mainly women already trained or working in childcare, who wanted to innovate and felt they could do better in providing a useful service than anything currently available. And they were right at the time. But it's changed considerably, and large parts of the private market now are monetised or profit-making in the worst, greediest sense of the word. But we still think of the private sector as being provided by small entrepreneurs who are contributing to the public good and whom we support by giving more money and support to do their job better. A lot of public money, several £billion, is being spent on the private sector with very little public scrutiny. The inevitability of the private market seems beyond question. It's the exclusive focus of the latest government initiative on childcare, despite its major faults of inequitable access, intense focus on profits, high costs, high turnover, poor staffing, low standards, neglect of children with disabilities, and extremely poor regulation from Ofsted. There's no accountability or parental participation in most of this provision. The most recent report on the private sector a few months ago from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation acknowledged these faults in the private sector, but considers they can be mitigated. They argue for a new social licensing model for early years education and childcare markets, where ambitious standards for all providers are a condition of receiving public funding. They argue these should be designated through engagement with providers, parents, local authorities and workers, and they should focus on workers' pay and conditions, driving up quality standards, value for money, including financial transparency and potential profit caps. But it's difficult to know how to reform Ofsted, which has never claimed to be a financial watchdog. And as I claim in the book, there's a whole chapter on regulation. It's a very poor watchdog for standards more generally. In the UNICEF report I mentioned at the beginning about early education and childcare in developed countries, the conclusion about the UK was that standards of care and education are so low they can't even be measured properly. As Jenny said to me earlier today, private operators are allowed to cram children into little boxes, converted shops, small warehouses or terrace houses, without adequate inside room or outside play space, with staff who've had little or no education training. This expansion has been watched over by Ofsted, a weak and self-congratulatory regulatory body that holds that most childcare provision, nearly 90% of it, is good or outstanding. I give shocking examples of this failure of regulation in the book. We should be ashamed that the government want to build a system of childcare around private nurseries where children and parents are treated with so little respect for their needs and wishes. We have to understand how bad private childcare has become. The argument I put forward at length in the book is that it's more trouble than it's worth to resuscitate the private sector. In the current rush for childcare, the government is condemning many, if not most, children to suboptimal care, offering miserable dead-end jobs to those who work in nurseries and enabling unscrupulous operators to make millions, literally, at our expense. Rather than extend a deeply flawed system of private childcare, we should try to support and extend the good provision that already exists. The state nursery schools and classes and the community provision, instead of watching them shrink and die because of an outdated economic doctrine about the viability of the private market. We should encourage not-for-profit childcare and social enterprises. We should find ways to support informal childcare workers, of whom there are very large numbers, who are mostly unnoticed. All the babysitters, aunties, au pairs, grannies, and others who make up the bulk of care for under twos. It's important now, in the short term, as a matter of urgency, to curb the activities of the large nursery chains and the private equity companies who control them, through setting limits on the amount of government funding they can receive and the number of nurseries they can operate. Although it's difficult to know who might take on this financial regulatory responsibility. But in the long term, we need a much more coherent plan of how to proceed. We articulated our blueprint a long while ago, and we should not have lost sight of it. We need, for our children's sake as well as our own, to revive it. Rosa's work on the record, and I hope the book Who Needs Nurseries We Do, is an attempt to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I've put a link to where you can buy the book in the chat now.
Can also get it from Amazon, of course.
Yes, I didn't put the Amazon link. And now I'm going to hand over to Jenny Williams. Jenny Williams has been involved in childcare campaigns and worked in the sector since the 1960s. She was a founder of the groundbreaking Maxilla Nursery Centre and went on to run the Colville Nursery Centre, both of which were in North Kensington. Maxilla and Colville Nursery Centres combined high-quality care and education, were state-funded but community-controlled, and free for children living in their catchment areas. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I've been asked to talk specifically about those two centres because I do think that in that period, they were certainly innovatory, although there were other children's centres that combined care and education, but because they grew out of the community and they grew out of community struggles, I do think that makes them a quite unique at that period experiment. And it was an experiment because we had so little to draw upon. They were both based in North Kensington, and North Kensington in that period was very unlike North Kensington today. It suffered from extreme poverty in pockets of real deprivation. And our first nursery centre was opened in Colville, which is a ward in Colville Ward, was very poor, became notorious for having ruckmen and various other unscrupulous landlords who harassed their tenants, many of whom were newly arrived from the Caribbean and worked in London Transport and in the NHS. And for 4 or 5 years, there was focus on housing because housing became a major draw for quite a lot of activists who came from outside, but also for the people who lived there, who began to combine together, particularly the women, to fight for better conditions by engaging with basically the rent tribunals and indeed the environmental officers to have their premises improved or indeed in some cases condemned. The major impetus to moving into the whole issues around childcare was play. Children only had the streets to play in, and there was considerable concern because a number of children had either been hurt in traffic accidents or indeed one child was killed, which led to a campaign for play space in the area, an area which had private locked squares and houses that were multi-occupied with only the street to play in. After a period, I think people began also to realise the need for childcare, because childcare in that period, as Helen has already said, was very limited, and North Kensington had quite a number of basically unregistered childminders, largely because their premises weren't sufficiently good to be registered, but also because many of them had over the numbers of children that they should have had. But for working parents in that area, this was the only alternative. So from moving on to from play onto playgroups, 2 playgroups were set up by Paris Playgroups. And these playgroups very rapidly were filled with children, but people realized that it wasn't meeting the needs of certainly working parents. And so that began in the mid-60s, going into the 70s, the whole concentration on what do we want and what kind of service do we want to run for children who were coming from very impoverished backgrounds. And from Paris Playgroups developed the campaign for Colville Nursery Centre. Colville Nursery Centre was the first nursery centre in that area to open. It opened in 1974, and it was interesting from 3 points of view. Firstly, that the Notting Hill Housing Trust that had been set up by Community Action really in 1963 was involved, unusually for a housing association, in providing premises for the children's centre. And that took a lot of negotiation and cajoling, I have to say. And then the fact that the ILIA showed some interest in taking part, as did the primary school. So we had three participants and the Borough Council, again, which was quite surprising because Kensington and Chelsea as a Borough Council was not exactly open to new innovations, but they did like the voluntary sector. So those 3 came together And with the assistance of architects from the Housing Trust, Colville Nursery Centre opened. It was in it was the bottom of and first floor of 2 converted houses in Colville Square, which backed onto Colville Square itself, which had been taken over by the local community as play space. The first thing that really I think is important was the fact that that conjunction of the local authorities and a voluntary organisation and the Housing Trust coming together to run it as part of a management committee that gave community control to the running of the centre. And that, for me, I think was an innovatory idea that really was partly dependent on the goodwill of all those people who took part in that process. So the centre then took off and provided up to 50 places. We had a nursery class that was linked to the primary school, and again there was goodwill in terms of the primary school welcomed the nursery class, and it provided a continuation for the children who were attending the centre, who move seamlessly into the reception class and then into year 1. The other element that was important was that it was a focus. It was a focus where we had very, very limited parent space, but there was parent space. And in terms of community building in an area which has huge levels of deprivation, it did provide support to parents, and we saw huge development in terms of their involvement in their children's learning and education, and also in their participation, which I think is a feature of a good childcare provision that continues into schooling. The major issue with Colville was that we didn't have enough space for babies. And that was always for us an issue, because clearly there was a huge demand. The other important issue about Colville was that, subsequently like Maxilla, it had a fixed catchment area. The catchment area was based on an assessment of how many children lived within the area, and the likelihood that a significant percentage of those children would want to use the centre. In drawing up the catchment area, and in fact in reviewing it, we were really supported by the local health visitors. And in those days, health visitors were attached to clinics and had patches. So it wasn't a fragmented service, it was a service that actually covered specific areas. And the health visitors were the publicists for the children's centre, because they would, as soon as they had a new child, they would say, there is this children's centre, and you will be able to use the children's centre if you live in the catchment area. And in fact, we had a huge uptake, but we didn't turn very many children away, because we were able to provide a service for the vast majority of the children who lived in that catchment area. So Colville trundled along and became a blueprint for Maxilla. And the difference between Colville and Maxilla was that, whereas Colville had been very sensitively actually created to be a child-friendly space, Maxilla, we had an absolutely blank sheet to begin to look at what we did want in terms of space and activity space outside as well as inside. The major really propellant for this was the fact that we had Westway Nursery Association, and Westway Nursery Association had been really set up as a campaigning organisation, and it included a lot of activists, and particularly the local women's centre, who were fairly vocal in their support of childcare, and other voluntary sector providers who joined in. We had both Save the Children Fund and the Preschool Learning Alliance, who were members of Westway. But it was seen very much as campaigning for high quality provision that would include both nursery education and childcare, and parents' role in terms of the management committee. We wanted very much to ensure that people who lived in the catchment area did know that they could participate in the centre. So one of the features of the centre was to have a parent, was to have space for parents. Now that required quite a lot of funding, because we managed to secure the support of the Inner London Education Authority as well as Kensington to put money into the project, but there was no funding for the parent centre. However, we fortunately found basically charitable funding for that. And I think we were very supported by the fact that ILIA was under a lot of pressure at that point to be seen to be far more community engaged. And so they were keen to put in to build a 60-place nursery school, but to engage with the community in doing that and to provide services that were for parents as well as children. So, and the involvement of ILIA meant that we had the services of their architects department and an architect who would engage with the local community in terms of the development, which I think was a fairly early example of co-designing spaces. The major other feature of Maxilla was that it in itself was the product of a community struggle. We had the Westway elevated motorway driven through North Kensington that divided the community in the early 70s. And there had been a very, very large community campaign to have the space under Westway designated for community use. We were relatively successful, but not totally successful. And that meant that we had space in which to both develop the children's centre and also play space. And I mean, that is the one thing that remains to this day of Maxilla Nursery Centre, is a beautiful play space. So Maxilla was set up in the late 1970s to provide a 60-place nursery school, as well as 40 places for children under, no, I think it was actually 30, sorry, places for children under 3, including babies. The major element there was that we didn't have quite enough space in the baby room, because the architect got rather confused between how he was about metric and feet and inches. So at that period, we were a little aghast that our baby room was a little smaller than we'd anticipated. However, Maxilla worked in exactly the same way as Colville, that parents from a catchment area could choose the service they wanted. The service was free except for a meal, which was based on the cost of a school meal. And if you were in receipt of benefit, then it was a free service. So the entire service for parents from 0 to 5 was free. The other element that was, I think, an important element was the encouragement given to parents to take part in the management of the centre and to be part of recruitment and all of the other features of the management committee, and to have space within the parent centre. And the parent centre provided it was in the middle of the building, and it provided both a base for, say, in the morning, where both the over 3s, the over 2s and 3s, and parents frequently joined in as well for breakfast. It provided also space during the day for parents' activities, a drop-in, legal advice and advice. So it was a very multi-purpose space, and a space that really tried to pull together the community around the children's centre and the service that the children's centre was providing. Both Colville and Maxilla paid on the national negotiated scales for both their teaching staff and their early years workers, and were both unionised and were upgraded as local authorities' scales go up, so does their scales go up. Now, and yes, this is one of our the unions. I think we were on a low paid demonstration in Hyde Park at that time. The other element of Colville and Maxilla that was, I think, quite important was training and the recruitment of staff who, and some staff who did come in unqualified, but the encouragement for those staff to continue to go on training and to qualify. And we had staff who started basically as nursery assistants who ended up in deciding that they wanted to teach. But we also, I think, had a number of staff who were very happy to remain with the under threes, but develop in all sorts of creative ways, the way in which they worked with under threes. And very often they took part in training of other professionals and other people who were working with children, very young children. I suppose the major element for us was that we survived through the Thatcher years when the Thatcher government was in fact cutting grants to local authorities. But unfortunately, by 1998, we had an issue with the local authority who provided the cost of our childcare, who gleefully told us that in future we wouldn't need to, they wouldn't provide us with a grant because the Labour government, and they said gleefully, your Labour government had said that parents are now going to have the money in which to buy the service. And although Maxilla struggled on, quite frankly, to provide the quality of service that Maxilla provided and the cost of the premises, it was impossible to have a fee that would cover those costs. And certainly for the parents who lived within our catchment area, it was totally out of reach. So the then Labour government's movement towards providing supply side funding really was the thing that was the downfall of both Colville and Maxilla in terms of providing a free service which was managed locally and encouraged development of other services, because Westway continued to look at ways in which they could improve services in other parts of the borough and support other people in doing that. And I suppose the saddest thing for us was that Maxilla and Colville both were seen by other people from outside the area as being trailblazers. And unfortunately, the end was brought about by a Labour government who we had hoped would actually use their examples as trailblazers to develop this type of service in other parts of the country. And that didn't happen. And except with, I suppose, towards the end of the second term of the Labour government, the money given to local authorities for centres of excellence that did develop a number of children's centres, which now, I mean, I was involved in the one in Lambeth, and we had 32 children's centres that we developed, and they're now happily closing them. So I'm afraid the our experience has not exactly was not exactly a trailblazer that continued, but we hope that in the future it will prove to be an example of what can be achieved by a local community banding together and having a vision. And I think we do need a vision. The book that Helen mentioned recently published, not Helen's book, but another book called, basically said that we were utopian. Well, I think we have to be utopian, and I think we have to actually have ambition for what we want to have for our children and basically also for their parents. And that has to be something that we take forward. I mean, I was somewhat embarrassed to see that we have a colleague from Finland, and given the quality of the Finnish system and ours, it really is very depressing that the fifth largest economy in the world is so poorly served in terms of provision for children under 5.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I think that brings us very nicely to hear from our next speakers. So I'm going to now ask if, I think we have Ian Dalton and Rosie Taylor here from the Save Little Owls Nurseries campaign. Would one or both of you like to say a few words about your campaign to the group?
Yeah. So I'm Ian Dalton. we've found out 4 weeks ago, I think today or tomorrow, by letters as parents to us that we picked up when we dropped off our children at nurseries, the 24 Little Elves nurseries across Leeds, whether our nursery was going to be one that was proposed for closure by the council, one that was proposed for kind of exploring alternate providers, which could include privatising the nursery, or whether the council would need to retain the nursery because otherwise they would fall short of the legal duty to ensure that they're adequate childcare places. And that's what led us to establish the Save Little Elves Nursery campaign that we've now been running for a couple of weeks since then. And obviously, this is linked to, I guess, the funding crisis in local government, the funding crisis for nurseries. The council had proposed cuts of about just short of £1 million in its budget to the nursery service in Leeds. And they had previously closed 4 other Little Owls nurseries about a year and a half ago as well. But obviously, when we all received those letters, obviously it was a shock to most parents. Most parents didn't know anything about the proposed cuts. Many parents were aware of the closures the previous year. Myself and a couple of other parents had seen that a year ago and decided to set up a Facebook group just in case anything else developed, because there had been talk at that time about reviewing the future of the nurseries across Leeds, and kind of didn't really think anything about it until the day after we all got those letters, and lots of people started joining the Facebook group. And we thought, right, we need to spring into action. So we organised a Zoom meeting, got people together. One parent at one of the nurseries proposed for closure, organised a rally that weekend as well to bring people there together. And really, we've not looked back since then. The 3 nurseries that were proposed for closure, by the way, were proposed to close in May. So that, including obviously having the Easter holiday between them, that was leaving parents with 8 weeks to find another nursery provider, which obviously was horrific. Fortunately, because of the backlash, because of us getting the campaign going, and the council, I think a week after the original letters were issued a second letter saying, that these are just proposals. And given the concern, we're going to delay the closures till August, but we're also going to have engagement events. Now, we don't think there were going to be engagement events until people started campaigning over it. And since then, we've done freedom of information requests, trying to find the review documents that these closures and proposals are based on. And the response we've had for that freedom of information request is that the review doesn't exist. Or it's not been, it's not been produced for the delegated decision making body. Either they're making it up as they go along, or in terms of proposing closures without having a rationale to back that up, or they're not prepared to share with us the documents actually that are actually have some sort of basis for why they've picked the particular nurseries to close, and why they're looking at other providers for 12 nurseries as well. So today we had a lobby of Leeds City Council's executive board, and got some press coverage there. We're going to have another rally this Saturday outside one of the other nurseries threatened with closure, Gipton North Little Owls Nursery. And we're determined to fight this, and we're calling on the council to withdraw the proposals, but also, instead of closing nurseries or privatising nurseries, to work with parents to fight for the funding that's necessary to keep them. Because ultimately, the childcare crisis is not going to be made any better by shutting down good, high quality, affordable nurseries, and that they need to be there. There's obviously been a lot of talk about funded places from the government. Well, there's a lot of reporting that says, I think quite accurately, that those funded places from the government don't cover the full costs. Well, that should be an open opportunity for our Labour and Council to call for that. And also we've got a general election this year. You know, the childcare crisis isn't going to go away. That will need to be dealt with. So there should be pressure being put on, you know, on whoever forms the next government after the general election as well. So that's some of the things we've been raising in our campaign. We've got an online petition, which I'm sure we can post in the chat. And I think hopefully Rosie was going to, you know, maybe talk a bit more about the campaign as well. So thank you for listening to us, and we, you know, we're really keen if we can to link up with other nursery campaigns, and Helen's book sounds like a really good resource that some of us will have to get around to reading.
Thank you so much, Ian. I think Louise has already put the petition in the chat, so if everyone could please have a look and sign that to support the Save the Little Owls Council Run Nurseries campaign. If it's okay, I think, if it's okay with you, Rosie, I think I'd like to ask the Hackney campaign to speak now, if that's okay, just because we're running a bit short on time, if that's okay. So there's another campaign here from Hackney. I think Yulia from Hackney is here to speak.
Hi everyone. Thanks very much for the really insightful, interesting presentation of Helen and Jenny. And I might sound very repetitive because what Ian said very much resonates with what's going on in Hackney. Hackney used to have 16 children's centers. They're down to 11 now. They've closed a few in 2016. They tried to close a couple of children's centers in 2021, but stopped due to COVID and legal challenge, and they're back at it. I come from a children's center that was not up for closure, so we also got the letter. It was also very kind of, you know, to us it felt out of the blue. Both of my children went to this and still are going to the children's center. I was very much emotionally affected. I mean, first of all, I couldn't believe I was getting that letter. Second of all, I started crying. I couldn't believe I was crying because, you know, because of a nursery course, which seemed very strange. But, you know, again, very, very similar lack of rationale on the side of the council to close nurseries. They're claiming that the nurseries they're closing are not subscribed. Both of them have waiting lists. We don't know where the data comes from. The council is not very good about sharing the data, giving us sources for the data. We also requested multiple information memorandums. What makes it even worse, they have hired very expensive consultants to give them some options on what to do. The very expensive consultants came around with 11 options. This is just one of them. And some of them are mutually exclusive, but there are at least 7 that we believe the council could have looked at, that could have maybe rationalized staffing, maybe, you know, saved money on procurement. They have not looked at the costing of those initiatives. They, you know, it doesn't look like they've done homework. They're very quietly running a consultation in the background, which again, we are trying to get as much engagement with in terms of general public. It's overall been a difficult progress. I mean, it definitely brought the communities together, but I think one of the sort of the most striking issues with the children's center closures in Hackney is that weirdly the council chose some of the more deprived areas in the borough to close nurseries. They did share some data on income levels, and by far they're not closing nurseries with, you know, families in high income brackets. So they're really hitting hard at families who need it the most, and which has been really, really awful. I think another sort of point that I'd like to raise about Hackney is that most children's centers have very low staff turnover. I know that staff turnover has been in the news, lack of qualifications. So everything that Helen mentioned, everything that Jenny mentioned is happening right now. Obviously, private nurseries are really struggling with staff turnover. Some of our staff has been there for 16 years since this children's center was, you know, built in 2006 as you know, part of the Labour government campaign. You know, the crazy part is the council spent about £1.1 million at that point to build that wonderful building in the park, which now will probably, with the potential closures, again, who knows? They claim that they'll find an alternative provider. I have a hard time believing it. You know, they will be giving away a building that was custom built, that they created specifically for these nurseries, and that's just also heartbreaking for us. And again, I think it's just I come from a point where, you know, my children are becoming old. One of them is old and is already in school, another one is getting older and older. So she actually can go to a nursery attached to a school, but you know, a lot of the people campaigning don't really, you know, it's not a question of my children. I think it's more a question of our children as a community. Again, all those wonderful opportunities that these children's centers provide, as not just as places for childcare, but also for early stage development, play groups, breastfeeding sections, so new parents. Our children's centers run legal services, so there's a lot there that's happening that's being closed down. The council is in a crazy way claiming this is a very opportune time to do this, which sounds absolutely insane. So we're fighting really hard, kind of using similar tactics as Ian's groups, you know, having protests, trying to talk to the press, emailing MPs, and putting pressure on the council to change their mind. I think that's about it from me.
Thank you so much, Julia. And there's been some interesting messages in the chat, including one which I'll read out in a second. Thank you both to Ian and Julia and Rosie for coming here to talk about your campaigns. We felt it was really important to hear about what's happening in local authority provided provision at the moment, at the same time as talking about private provision and the inspiring example of nursery centres that Jenny was able to give us from the past as well. There's also been a message from Joe Henley in the chat, who is currently on strike in Wandsworth. So it'd be great to hear from you in the discussion in a minute. And a little bit further up in the chat, Louise has also put links to a petition for Julia's Hackney campaign and the consultation. And I think both of those are for Hackney residents to sign, aren't they, Julia? Especially people who live or work in Hackney, is that right? Or would you like
I mean, the consultation can be filled by people who live, work, or study in Hackney, and I think the petition is similar. Although I'm not 100% sure who places it. But if you are anyhow related or connected to Hackney, would appreciate all the voices that we can get, all the help that we can get. Thank you.
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I just briefly would like to ask Louise, who's here from Post-Pandemic Childcare Coalition, just to say a few words, and then we'll turn over to a general discussion and hopefully hear from more of you. Louise, are you there? Yes.
Hi, thanks. So yeah, I'd just say everyone, if you could sign and share those petitions and get them out there, because I think adding the names, and you'll have to put in your postcode and stuff. So, but it's great if you know people in Hackney or in Leeds, and just get it out there and get awareness going as well of what's happening to these kind of amazing spaces and resources. And yeah, so I'm an organizer of the Post-Pandemic Childcare, which is working with On the Record on the Grow Your Own project. We began during the second lockdown, thus our name, with the intention to raise aspects of the childcare crisis overlooked by mainstream advocacy and the early years industry lobby. And we particularly how workers' rights, the hostile environment, and disabled rights and provision are ignored or sidelined in terms of often in terms of campaign demands. And we're building our aim is to sort of build a grassroots coalition and a network of early years workers and parent campaigners calling for policy changes to recognise unpaid and exploitative childcare work. So we've called for a reversal of the new conditionality of universal credit, urgent increases to child benefit, an end to the 2-child cap, an end to the hostile environment, and no recourse to public funds. And we've also previously been calling for reform and working out how to explain that and articulate that, which is why Helen's book is so useful and important, her work, as discussed, away from the demand side and the entitlement system that subsidises private companies instead of investing in the infrastructure. So this is like the entitlement hours allocated to the child model that was begun in the Blair years, and which, as Helen describes, is what causes the privatisation, and as Jenny described, closed maxilla. And we'd called for a direct funding, conditional direct funding of childcare settings to ensure that there are pay scales for workers and real living wage and universal and accessible places with no profits to shareholders. And I'd note that even the so-called social enterprise chains currently function by making use of the lowest paid workers in the formal economy, apprentices, and of course Helen does raise that too. And we're also calling for expanding public childcare and investment in public universal early years services integrated with local public services. And our main focus recently has been saving what we've got in terms of the public nurseries and connecting our network of veteran campaigners. We've got parents campaigns in Salford and Tower Hamlets and also Hillingdon to support current campaigns against the closure of council-run day nurseries. So alongside the actions which have been mentioned by Julia and Ian for Leeds and Hackney, I think we'd really like to just open the discussion up for ideas from the floor about how to promote the research and the arguments that are in Helen's book, and for further ideas about how to urgently fight these hugely damaging planned closures in Hackney and Leeds and stop the loss of these spaces and the knowledge and experience of all these qualified, experienced early years workers who are, there are 50 in Hackney who are up for, who will be made redundant if these places are closed or privatised. Their terms of conditions will be lost. And then one initial thought was looking at the people here from various organisations and experts and academics. One action could maybe be letters, an open letter to the Mayor of Hackney and the leader of Hackney of Leeds Council from people here, from Helen, maybe raising some of the key research and the urgency to hold on to these spaces. And it would be really great, if people could, if people have thoughts of this and ideas for our actions. So I'll let Rosa chair it and open that up. And if you'd like to be in touch, I'm just going to put our email address in the chat, and we'll also find us through on the record.
So I know we've been talking for quite a long time now, but at the end of Helen's wonderful talk, Helen explained some of the things she's calling for in her book, and we wanted to open up the discussion to talk about those issues and the things Louise and Ian and Julia have raised, and bearing in mind the inspiration provided by Jenny as well. Focusing on the urgent question of what we can do now. So I'd love to hear any of your thoughts. If anyone wants to contribute, please put up your hand. Joe, it would be great to hear about what's happening at your maintained nursery school in Wandsworth as well, if you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm at Balham Maintained Nursery School. We're a federation of nursery schools. There's 3. 2 of them are having really significant cuts. So currently they both have 2 classes, and that's going to be reduced to 1. A few years ago, we were federated and we were told this will protect us going forwards, and we'd be financially more viable and things like that. And that didn't happen. We've lost staff ever since, and now we're faced with a new restructuring that's really drastic. After the federation, workloads for senior leaders got very, very heavy, and obviously that filters down. I would say a few years ago, workloads could be described as quite punishing. I think people think small schools are easy, but actually they're really hard. You've got very few number of people working in them, and you have to do everything, open them up, close them, fix a ceiling that's leaking, all of these things we have to deal with. So for us, that meant that a lot of our senior leaders ended up becoming unwell and experiencing lots of stress, and they've all left, and the local authority have put in an executive head teacher to make cuts. So we currently have a senior leadership team who's there to make cuts, and they don't have the sort of maintain nursery school sort of early years expertise that most of our other previous head teachers have had. So that makes sort of, you know, arguing our case and helping them understand what we're doing really difficult. At Balham, all of the core team are NEU members, and the NEU have been great. And there's an NEU maintained nursery school group. There's loads of people in there have been incredibly supportive, and we wouldn't be at the point that we're at now without their support. So we balloted members, and we're in the middle of strike action. The only sort of demand that you asked of the governing body and our senior leaders is to talk to them, and they've refused. So that's where we're at now. The leader of our union is going to come and join us on the picket line next week, so we're hoping that we might get some press in that event. So yeah, that's kind of just an overview of where we're at. We always used to be known as a Frobelian nursery. We've had to make the garden smaller. We've packed away the real tools, you know, all of that really wonderful early years practice just isn't safe when I'm teaching in class now. There's just me, just by myself. And we used to have, when I first started teaching, I originally had a team of 8 people. And now we have 1 in and 1 out in the garden. So you can just imagine, everyone here, you know, understands what that would feel like. You know, if a child falls over, or if a child needs their nappy changed, we're under a lot of stress to oversee just what's going on, let alone think about being with children, developing relationships, caring for them. Yeah, so that's the situation with us.
Thank you, Jo, and good luck.
Thank you.
With the strike. Are you in the NEU? Is that your union, or?
Yes, we're all of the core team at Balham are in the NEU. So it's been great to have their support. Yeah.
Do you let us know if there's things other people can support with in terms of your
I've put links in the chat. There's an NEU video of us talking about the nursery. There's a petition link, and there's a letter, an Action Network letter as well that the NEU have written. So you can just put your details in and click a button, and it goes to the decision makers.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll go through the chat at the end of this and maybe send through Eventbrite. I could send all these links on again to everyone, so they're all in one place. I think that would be helpful.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thanks.
Hannah, what would you like to say?
Hi, I don't want to take away any time from the campaigns, but I'm really interested in the image that you shared at the beginning, and I've just done a quick Google, and I already knew that Leeds Animation Workshop sell the film that was made in the 70s, and I just, in terms of our storytelling for Leeds and how it's gone full circle, I just wondered if any of the speakers, like Helen, could share some information about that, how that film came about, and if there is a Leeds connection, what that is, if that's okay. I don't, as I said, I don't want to take any time away from planning and organising for the various campaigns. Thank you.
Helen, would you like to respond to that?
I don't think they exist anymore, certainly not in the way that they used to. I mean, we're talking about the early 1970s when that was made. And I do think they were wonderful, but...
I think they do actually, Helen, sorry, because I contacted them about the film. Wonderful.
They do exist, yeah, and you can still buy it on the website, yeah.
Right. Well, it'd be great if you're still doing things.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, if you're in Leeds, yeah, maybe they'd like to support the current campaign. I know I contacted them to ask them about the film, and they said, yeah, but they still had it for sale. So same as you, like, yeah, maybe a screening in Leeds is in order. I don't know.
I hope you could come up to Leeds to see that. Thank you.
Can I speak?
Yes, please. Yes.
I'm so sorry. I can't find how to put my hand up on the
No, you did.
My name's Paula. I'm a maintained nursery school teacher from Cambridge, and I just want to say that I've had, is it Wednesday, 3 days back, and I'm absolutely on my knees after 3 days back. And the situation that has been described elsewhere, I mean, is true in our nursery. We were a big children's centre, and since COVID have been decimated, and are a tiny nursery school with very high level of need and not enough staff and crumbling. So I found what you've talked about tonight is absolutely inspiring, and where the history of where we've come from is really, really important, and it's something I'm going to take back into our union and maybe talk to you about doing that, because both in terms of the community base, but also the nature of how state nurseries have been run in the past, it has to be part of our vision in the future. Absolutely, because I think I've just come from our union conference where we had a big motion on early years, and it talked about how relentless the drive, but absolutely conscious of the government, the drive of privatisation and the market in the nursery sector, how it's been. And the latest expansion is another phase of that, and alongside that is the decimation of the maintained sector of any state provision. So I completely agree with what you're saying. That is what is happening to my nursery school, where I would say we had some very high quality practice. It is being decimated, at a time when they're expanding. And that is a conscious political, ideological thing that they are doing. And I was just thinking, and I'll finish on this, when you were talking about the involvement of parents, how because of what's happened with the market, it's commodified childcare. And I think what that does is it breaks that link of parental involvement and parental agency and ownership and of early childhood learning and development. And it comes with a massive cost. I think there are huge issues around what children and young families are suffering, with this complete breakdown of services around the family, and this break with family involvement that has happened with the marketisation. So it has to be at the core of our vision in the future. And thank you for tonight. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Nice to see you again. Lucy, you got your hand up. Oh, you're muted. Oh. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I've done it. Sorry, I'm on my phone. It was playing. I mean, I was going to agree so much with Paula. Like Paula, I'm also a maintained nursery school teacher. I work in an ARP for children with autism in a maintained nursery school. I am also absolutely on my knees 3 days in and covered in bruises. I feel the same way, the things that Joe was saying about feeling really unsafe, about having a number of children that we have to manage and stuff. I absolutely agree with. But like Paula, I've just come from NEU conference. I'm an NEU member as well, and we were involved in writing and writing amendments as well to the motion around early years. So we have a commitment from our union. We have won some really, really important things in the NEU, and I just think it's important that people know about that we have a commitment to state-funded nursery care. We've also, for people anybody that is in a nursery school or at PVI, it doesn't matter where you're working in the early years sector, but we've got new membership rates for early years practitioners, because we really want to get the whole sector organised as much as possible in order to fight for a push back into state funding, and away from this commoditisation that everybody's been talking about. One of the things when I was moving the amendment at conference was talking about, look at what's happened with water, right? I'm in the Thames water area. It's a monopoly, and yet they still can't keep poo out of the blinking water. That's the same system they're using to run our nurseries, and it's disgusting. It's disgusting for, the effect it's having on young children. And I don't think, I think we're united with parents that we don't want that. We won't stand for it. So really urge people to, please, if you can get involved, do get involved. And I think Paul is absolutely right. We should be building this story around actually the history of our nursery education, and making sure everybody knows where we've come from, because that's what we're fighting to get back to, that and more, and build on that amazing history and the shoulders of some of the giants that are in this room, to be honest. So thank you very much. Really enjoyed it tonight, as knackered as I am.
Well, thank you for being here, Lucy, and the other nursery workers that are tired. But yeah, it's great to have you here. Sheila has got her hand up, and I also wanted to ask Helen if you wanted to come back in about some of the points on the history of nursery education. But should we hear from you first, Sheila, and then if you want to say something after that, Helen, is that okay?
Yeah, hi. I'm a nursery teacher. I work in a class in a school rather than a separate nursery school. But all of this has resonated so much, and it's really great to hear from Helen and Jenny, and about all the things that have gone in the past to build what we've got, and does shape what we're providing for children and young families, even if many of those things have been pulled back. But I think it all comes down to the fact that actually it's totally undervalued in society, that early start that children need and that support that families need at the start is completely undervalued. We can see that with the cuts that everyone's been talking about. We can see that with the low pay that are offered to staff, and the lack of professional development and support for young people who are wanting to go into the profession of childcare and supporting those children. And I think, those are some of the things that we need to sort of bring into this as well, and to amalgamate with that. And I think, that also links with sort of the pushing with the changes of ratios with younger children, which the government can dress up in whatever way they want, but basically what it is forcing parents back to work whilst they're not actually investing into childcare and early education to ensure that we've got enough qualified adults to be able to support those children as best they can. And I think parents are crying out for it. I work in a very deprived area in Bristol. Most of my children live in high-rise flats. Have really struggled through the pandemic, and now just starting to be able to be with lots of other children, and all of those things that I'm sure anyone who works in early years is facing at the moment, struggling with speech and language, struggling with being able to behave with other children, know how to interact with them, all of those things that we struggle with when we're supporting those children, but families have had to struggle with at home, and those wider services that have all been cut and they're not there. I think it's essential that we're pulling all of those into all of these discussions. And Ian was saying from the Leeds campaign, it is coming up to an election. This is a great time to have that push and actually push and say, this is what we need in our areas. This is what we need to develop and ensure that actually we're supporting all our children and our young families. And just to finish off, because I am in a row of us now, so I'm also in the National Education Union along with Lucy and Paula. And Joe, and was at our national conference as well. And that I would just like to, just sell that as well, because obviously the way that we campaign for many of these things, we do campaign in our communities, but by campaigning in our workplaces and ensuring that we've got that strong union voice, we'll also be able to push many of these things onto the wider political arena. So just a shout out, if you want a good union, the NEU is a good one to join.
Thank you. Helen, is this a good point to bring you back in?
Are there more comments and questions? Perhaps I'll come in a bit later if
yeah. No one else has their hand up right now, but would anyone else like to say anything? Who doesn't have their hand up?
Okay, well, I think it's wonderful that there are so many activists and so many people who are concerned about what's happening. And I hope that it will be possible to join up and make an impact with all this campaigning and all this anger, because it is just terrible the way that people have been overridden. I mean, in a way, I'm a bit tired. I'm old, and it's not so easy to get involved in all these things anymore. But certainly the need is there to really, really make your voice heard and to argue against the kind of changes that are taking place.
Yes. I mean, it made me think that about the bit in your book where at the beginning where you're talking about how, you know, how the different kinds of nurseries we have developed, and yeah, the very beginning of nursery education, and how important the nursery schools have always been as a training
I mean,
and basis of good practice.
Absolutely. I mean, we were the wonder of the world for our nursery provision in I suppose with Margaret Macmillan and in the 20s and 30s. I mean, it was so innovative and people were so well trained. And to think of that being dissipated, I mean, I used to take all the time I was writing the book, I was also taking my grandson to his nursery class at a local primary school. And it was a full-time nursery class. Well, full-time doesn't mean childcare full-time, but it was very good provision. And he was so enthusiastic about what he was doing. It was just wonderful to see a child enjoying himself like that and learning at a tremendous rate. And I think how awful some of the provision that I see around me is. We really must make more of a protest about how children are treated. It's so bad when we could have it really good.
Pamela Calder, would you like to speak?
Yeah. I was wondering how we could actually use this recording, because I think it's going to be a very powerful recording. And in a way, you want journalists to get involved as well. There's a whole area here to be explored further. But first, I'd just like to use it myself in a meeting on Friday for a meeting of the Early Childhood Studies Degrees Network. You know, we've been trying for years to get well-qualified jobs and careers for people with degrees in the area. And instead, like everything else, they're subject to the same sorts of cuts. The universities are cutting back on those courses. So even if there's an expansion in the future, we won't have the people there to take the jobs. But this is a different local level of we need the sort of geographical expansion that you can see is going on in this chat. That people need to know what's happening elsewhere. Parents need to know. So it is how can we use this to go further? So will it be easy to get hold of it from you once
yes.
the recording is there? Yeah.
I can send it to you tomorrow. Yes, if you want to use it on Friday. Yes, and I will try to get it online, probably on our website, and I'll let people know where they can find it.
And the chat part will be important as well, because it gives all the links to things. So,
yes, I can collate the links. That will be separate. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Pam. Angela Scollin.
Hello, hi, thank you. Gosh, just want to say thank you to everybody I've been listening to. It's a bit of a sobering thought today, and I want to just carry on with what Pamela was saying about this space being so powerful, and it's just drawn out a reality that sometimes I think we're so busy doing what we do, advocating or working in the positions that we're doing. We're kept so busy with more and more workloads, everything being swept into education and early years. With whatever's happening in society, to have this sobering space right now is powerful. And I'm just in the middle of marking my students at Middlesex University, and I thought, gosh, I sat here thinking, what am I sending them out to? Just a reflection. I'm trying to stay on the sunny side because, you know, the advocacy is powerful and we do what we do because we know that it's for children. But I don't know, I think spaces like this are powerful and drawing everybody together. And I think the point that Pamela made about sharing this video as a resource to go out, recording, not video, to go out would, you know, reach a lot more that needs to hear all this. And I think whoever it was that mentioned the metaphor to the water system, I can't top that. That's amazing.
Thank you so much, Angela. That's really good to hear from you as well. I think there's been a few things in the chat about what people wanting to stay in touch, and I think we can definitely help facilitate that if people want to do that. There's Post-Pandemic Childcare Coalition exists to connect different campaigns already, so that could be a really good way for people to be in touch. But also there's because this is an online event, this I have I can message you all through Eventbrite basically, so hopefully I can send a way that we can stay in touch if people want to, and be able to communicate with each other directly. It does feel like that would be very useful with the different things that are going on. Is there anyone else that would like to say something? A moment.
Just that we have like a WhatsApp as well, if people want to join the WhatsApp and just feed into there with their campaigns and stuff, that kind of thing. I don't know if people are active, they're probably like, not another WhatsApp, but I've also put our email address there, so if anyone wants to be in touch with me and then to do with like active organizing following this, then great, then it's there.
Brilliant. Okay.
Have you put that WhatsApp? How do you get on that WhatsApp?
Well, I could just I was just trying to work out. I've just finding the link. I'm just gonna send it. Yeah. So is that the right one? Yes. So it's called National Nurseries Campaign, and there are a number of people there who've organised for like motions and stuff to go to conferences and things like that, to Labour Party conferences, and there's people from different campaigns who've all kind of ended up in that chat. So and there's people from nursery schools and various. So I'll just I'll share it. Let me just find it in the WhatsApp on my computer and then try and copy it over. But you can also email me if you have any trouble with that, and I can just connect you tomorrow. So
well, perhaps Louise, perhaps I can put that in a message to everyone through the Eventbrite as well.
It might be, that would be good.
That would be great. Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything? Helen or Jenny, do you have anything else? Oh, Megan, what would you like to say?
Sorry, I don't use Zoom very often, and I need to re-familiarize myself with the buttons. I have knocked around this world for the best part of 25 years ago. I cut my teeth at Daycare Trust, which was the National Childcare Campaign, which I think probably at this point I would say sadly has been absorbed into something where it doesn't do what it used to do. But it does strike me, who's somebody who does now, 25 years later, have my own children, and in the second week of the half term lost the childcare I had. So I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to sort of re-establish some kind of after school care for my own children. So I have had a very sort of depressed, I guess, fortnight, thinking, gosh, we're really not moved on at all in 25 years of work and campaigning, and that is really frustrating. And personally and professionally, I feel very frustrated that I am so hung-strung with the care and responsibilities, which I love and enjoy, but it is such a burden at not quite 50. So I sort of say that as the sort of the precursor to all this But I think there was a piece of work published by the Forces Society at the beginning of the week, which, if you've not read it, is really worth a look, because it does look at international comparisons, and there's lots of international work out there. But what I found really interesting about it is some of the warnings of what's happened in other countries when things haven't gone right. I, at one point, did have a mastermind knowledge of how awful things were in Australia when a third of their provision just disappeared overnight, and the impact that that had. And there is other sorts of elements of that kind of almost Armageddon scenario in the context of this report. So I would encourage you to kind of read that as part of your set of tools or ammunition in some of these local campaigns that you are having. I mean, you know, I now work independently for a number of people. I'm involved in the Stronger Practice hubs in East London a couple of days a week, and I do a lot of work of local authority analysis for the Local Government Information Unit. So I'm kind of their early years lead. So I look at this at a very local authority level, but on a national picture. And sadly, none of what anybody said tonight has surprised me. It is a really grim picture, and it's really, really sad that after what I personally, I was probably very lucky to start my career in this world. It's sort of 97, 98 when this was on a real rise, and there was a lot of sense of actually, you know, people are finally getting it, and you know, there's some real potential, and that's just dropped off in the last 10 or 15 years, and we've continued to sort of struggle and I mean, and just sort of, I suppose the other observation I would make is that as chair of governors of an infant school in South London, you know, things in schools are just really, really grim. Things in education are just really, really grim. And I think we've lost, you know, I think for a long time, the early years education world has suffered from the schism between the PVI have got it really tough and it's all honey and clover in the maintained sector. And I think that's well and truly gone, and those days are over. So, you know, schools perhaps facing different pressures, but many of you are in maintained settings, and things are really, really grim. You know, in London in particular, we've got massive falls in just people, just numbers, children generally. Schools in South London and my part of the world are certainly shutting on a pretty alarming basis. I think the other kind of point, and I've just had a chat with, sorry, I've lost your name, who I was chatting to about the SEND situation, but the work that I'm doing in the Stronger Practice Hub and the horror story that I'm seeing over the bit of east of London that we cover as the East London Stronger Practice Hub, particularly for SEND children and their families. You know, just nothing. There is just no places or no provision that will attempt to meet those children's needs. And then, you know, you wonder why, to use the awful phrase, they're not school ready. There is just no access. So it's just really some reflections and a sense of I hear you, but also a sense of you're not alone. And I do kind of long for the national coordination of an organisation like Daycare Trust that at various points has given that. You know, I came into Daycare Trust's existence, so to speak, relatively late in the day. Many of you have been involved in that long before I was working and arguably even born. But I just sort of just wanted to sort of note those kind of thoughts and themes. And again, find me on LinkedIn. I do lots of work. I've got lots of fingers and lots of pies, but very happy to provide evidence and make suggestions and those kind of things after 25 years of sort of working in the campaign environment in early childhood education.
Thank you so much, Megan. So yeah, I think it might be, yeah, we're coming to the end of our time. So I think it's been really positive, and thank you all for taking part. Just to wrap up, if there's any final thoughts on things people would like to, yeah, there's anything people would like to suggest, or yeah. Paula, did you want to say something?
I mean, obviously, and Megan sort of rounded up the picture in terms of the battle that we're facing. But I think it is incredibly important that there are 3 campaigns here tonight that who are fighting. And that is very, very important, and has made me think about, certainly we're having a union meeting next week in my setting, and this has armed me actually to light that fire. And I think we have to do some of this, lighting fires, you know, to save and to fight for our provision. But I wonder also if we're getting close to a point where we have to have some form of national mobilisation that brings, you know, parents and workers in the sector together, especially, I don't know if going into the autumn term, into an election period where we take to the streets, you know, because they are using it. It's on, they use it all the time about, you know, what they're doing and how great it is. And so I think we have to tell it how it is, but how we want it to be.
Definitely, yeah.
Just to finish, I think there have been, obviously there's been mobilizations, and there was parents sort of getting out there and sort of shouting about the situation, but it tended to be under the banner of more free hours. And of course they got the 3 hours and they haven't actually delivered. So there'll be a lot of, there is some anger there as well to gather, that could be gathered in a way that really foregrounds the people doing the work and the children.
And I think, I mean, to bring it back to the launch of Who Needs Nurseries, we do, and Helen has some really concrete suggestions that are practical and not, you know, but what we've been seeing in the press so much about just raising the amount of the 3 hours. And yeah, and I think we need to make the point that that's not the point.
That's not the answer.
Yes. Helen, do you want to say any final words to close us off? Oh.
Just that it's been a terrific meeting, and you know, good luck to everybody.
Okay. Yes. Well, we'll be in touch with ways to stay in touch, and also all the links to the petitions and other things that people have shared. Okay. Thank you everyone for taking part. Yeah.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks so much, and thank you very much, Helen, Jenny, Ian, Rosie, Julia, and Louise as well. Okay.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
I just asked one very small question, and I might have missed it right at the beginning, but the book, Helen's book, is it only in Kindle style, or can I buy a hard copy as well?
No, online, I'm afraid. It was part of a series called Rapid Response that the Policy Press brought out. So I wrote it very quickly. It probably shows. And
I haven't got that far to make any judgment, but so it is only Kindle. I can't buy a hard copy. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right, fine. Just so I know, because I prefer the hard copy. But if it's only in Kindle, then that'll have to be how it comes. That's fine. Thank you.
You can buy a sort of digital non-Kindle version, I think, as well.
Yeah,
where you just...
yeah. I'm sorry, again, old school. I just quite like to turn a page. Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.